Welcome to Invest in Yourself, the Digital Entrepreneur Podcast. Join the podcast mogul Phil Better as he interviews successful entrepreneurs that make their living in the digital world. Now, let's join your host, Phil Better, and his special guest today on Invest in Yourself, the Digital Entrepreneur Podcast. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Invest in Yourself, the Digital Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm, of course, your host with the most, Phil Better, and today we have a guest who's on a mission to empower the middle class by teaching the financial tools used by the wealthy. This is going to be a game-changing episode, especially for all you business owners out there looking to grow your wealth and strengthen your financial future. Our guest today is the founder and managing partner of Iron Castle Capital, and a long-standing mortgage broker with a deep knowledge of real estate and passive income strategies. Their biggest passion is educating blue-collar business owners and often overlooked group on how they can use the same wealth building strategies as the wealthy to not only grow their own business, but also revitalize the middle class, which we need. If you don't know, middle class is shrinking. We need to grow that. Our guest has spent years mastering the art of real estate, syndication, and passive income, and he is here today to share his knowledge with all of us. Plus, if you're a fan of the Denver Broncos, you'll love hearing from this season ticket holder who loves his local teams and, just like you, finds time to kick back with some poker and golf. So without further ado, let's get ready to dive into some incredible insight from my guest, Jerry Garcia. Jerry, thank you so much for being here.
I appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to have a chat and see what I can teach some people.
Oh, I'm very, very excited. You're the second guest that focuses on the blue collars that I had in the middle class, and I love it because as someone who comes from the blue collar, not the blue collar, but the middle class, right? My dad's family was blue collar. He moved into the white collar world. So I understand the struggles that blue collar families go through. So I'm excited to have you here and chatting with you about what you're doing to help revolutionize and revitalize that class that has been, forgotten, if you will, but always talked about in politics, but forgotten. Right. By everybody else. So, Jerry, thank you so much. But I'm going to ask you the first question I always ask. Why? Why did you decide to become an entrepreneur and risk everything to help those blue-collar people?
Honestly, I mean, I've grown up, kind of doing a lot of time for money type jobs. Coming up, my first job actually was in nonprofit. Did a lot of peer education type stuff. From there, I did that for about 5-6 years and wanted to go into something a little more low key. And so I was a poker dealer for quite a while. From there, moved into mortgages. Once again, that's a little more entrepreneurial, but more of a, it's still kind of a time for money type of exchange, more commission based. But moving into the entrepreneurial world now, it's more about creating the kind of lifestyle that I want, creating the type of income that I want, just trying to make things happen on my own and along with the help of my fiance. And, we're building some businesses together and trying to, in the process, educate other people as we kind of move along that journey.
I love that. I love that as an educational journey going through everything. My question is, I'm always interested. How did you get into the poker dealing? Like that is something I've not had any connections to, and I'm curious to know because it's interesting.
Yeah, I just kind of fell into it. Honestly, I was at the time I was living in New York. Me and a buddy of mine moved to New York briefly, and I started hearing that poker was becoming very popular on TV. And to me, that seemed kind of absurd. I grew up playing poker, and I just couldn't understand how you can watch it and how that could be entertaining. So I started watching it just to see, and then I actually got very into it. Started, when I moved back to Denver. Started looking for places to play poker, and we had a lot of bar tours here who would come and, you can go play for free at night. So I started doing that in my free time and got my dad into it. And then I was looking for a night job. So I, started playing a lot and said, hey, what if I wanted a deal? And just kind of fell into it that way. Did the bar poker thing for about a year before I moved up to working in an actual casino for almost 10 years.
I have to ask you, what is the biggest hand that you've played Okay. Before we jump into the whole entrepreneurial
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
because this
I'm
is
with it, man.
I'm so interested in this, and people are gonna be like, Phil, we want to hear the news, we want to get that good stuff. But wait, the biggest hand that you've been involved in as a player, and then the biggest hand that you've been in as a dealer.
All right. Well, that'll be good. We'll start with as a player. I mean, I played. There's this big game at the casino I used to work at. It's a 30-60 limit game. So blinds are $15 and $30. It's limit, meaning you can only bet in specific increments. So pre-flop, post-flop, $15 raises up to four per round, and then turn river $60 bets per round. So once I had left the casino, I came back. I don't know, a year and a half later, and jumped into this game for a while. I can't remember any specific hands, but I mean, those sessions, I think in 3 sessions, I made $10,000. And then I went back for a fourth and I lost $2,000. And then I haven't played in that game since.
You're like, I won. I came out with 8 Gs. I'm happy. I'm gonna walk away now. Now, as a dealer, do you remember one of the biggest hands?
I can tell you the biggest one. So we had these things called bad beat jackpots. Basically, these pots build. It's part of the rake that the house takes. Part of it goes to building these jackpots that are paid out if you have a specific hand and lose to a higher hand. So our threshold for that is if you got a 4 of a kind and you lost to a better hand, you would win this jackpot. And these ones were massive. We had been building them like nobody had hit one for months and months and months. And so the one that I dealt was quad. It was 4 of a kind. I believe it was 8s versus 4 queens.
Oh,
So, and you get there and people know people are chasing these things. At the time, we had 3 of these humongous jackpots. And so the wait list for getting into the poker room at that time was literally 12-hour waits to get in, because people were just spending all of their time there trying to hit one of these jackpots. So when I dealt it, the jackpot was 630,000. And so that gets split amongst the table. So the person who loses that hand gets the biggest share. They get 40% of that pot. The person who wins that hand gets 30% of that pot. And then the remaining players at the table will get 30% of the pot.
Jesus.
So, doled out a lot of money that day.
Yeah, that is a heck of a
made good money. I got about $13,500 in tips for that hand.
Yeah, of course. I would hope you got a little. I was going to ask, did you get tipped out? That is a good hand. If I was the player, I would have been like, here you go. Here's a couple thousand, because thank you for that, big boy. All right, so we're going to jump into the real stuff that we're here for. Jerry, is entrepreneurship. So after you left the casino, and where did you go, and how did you decide like mortgages and stuff like that? Like, what was the next step on your journey?
So for me, it was actually a friend of mine who played at the casino, who I just knew him through the poker world. And he was a big mortgage broker. And I'd been kind of looking for something, things kind of changed for me when I had my daughter. So here in Colorado, the casinos are up in the mountains. So if you live kind of near the city like I did, it's about an hour and a half drive. And that can get dangerous in the winter. You're driving through the mountains to get up there. And so having a daughter kind of changed my perspective. I wanted something where I didn't have to work nights and holidays and weekends. I wanted something a little more stable, much less dangerous of a drive. So I started kind of figuring out what I wanted to do next. And my buddy was a mortgage broker. And, I gave him a ride home one day after my shift. And we started talking. He's like, man, you should do it. So I started taking the education, took the test, and did both jobs for quite a while, actually. I was part-time as a mortgage broker. I was just kind of learning that business. So I didn't want to just jump full force into it being commission only and, risk not having a payday. So for almost 3 years, I did both. And it was kind of slow building that business. And, it finally got some traction, and it got to the point where like, all right, I'm getting busy now. I'm going to make mortgage broker my full-time, go part-time at the casino. And until I got to the point where it's just like, all right, now it's just too much. Now this is actually in my way and holding me back from growing. And so I was able to make the full transition at that point.
I love that. And then as a mortgage broker, obviously you're helping people get their dream houses or start their second house and start their passive income. What was the education like for you learning about creating that passive income?
So I'll tell you, a big part of that journey came much later in my career. For a long time, it was just your standard, buy a house. Um, but I got involved with a group called Active Duty Passive Income. Great group. They're still out there. They're on Facebook. Look them up. They're great. They focus specifically on helping military, and more specifically, especially active duty military people, to utilize their VA benefit in a way that allows them to start planning for life after service. So, what we would teach is, hey, you're at your duty station. Let's go out. Let's buy you a property. Ideally, depending on the market, maybe even a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex, where you can live in one unit, rent out the others, helping you pay that mortgage. And then when you transfer to a new duty station, repeat. And, a lot of these guys transferred 2-3 times, and they'd hopefully done this enough times that, by the time they exited service, they had some cash flowing properties. So they had some means for an income built up already.
I love that. That's such a smart way of going, because obviously military, they're the backbone of most society. They keep us safe, they protect us, and without them being taken care of, because whatever your politics are, sometimes vets aren't taken care of, and we need
Sure.
to take care of them for what they do. So you were out there helping them get that through, so that they could leave the military and have at least a decent income coming in. So if they took time to find a job, they're not drowning in debt.
Right.
Which,
And honestly, if I could go back and start my own personal real estate journey, I would love to have known this. I didn't know this stuff when I bought my first house. If you could be a young guy and, or a young couple, even go out and buy a duplex. Now, I live in Denver, and the cost for that now is astronomical. But back when I bought my first house, we're talking 2010, not long after the 2008 crash, that would have been very attainable to get a duplex. And it was only, me and my wife at the time. We could have easily bought a place and had that paying rent, and then moved up to a different place and, built a nice little real estate portfolio. But, hindsight's 2020, and just happy to help others get started in that way. It's like super fulfilling for me.
helping anybody is super fulfilling. Getting them to see them reach a level of safety, if you will, is great, or start their journey. When did you transition from just being a simple mortgage broker into what you're doing now, helping blue collared people?
So this is more of a transition over the last year and a half or so. So being in the mortgage space, as rates kind of skyrocketed, things slowed down in that industry. And thankfully, it was at a time when my fiance's business was kind of taking off. So she, I was able to help her kind of get that thing moving and getting it really going. And in the meantime, she said, look, you encouraged me to take this step and do what I wanted to do a couple years back. And now I want to kind of return that favor. Like, what is it that you want to do? And so I took some time to think about that. And while I continue to originate mortgages, I started thinking about what else that I wanted to do. And one of the things I had learned about, and it was kind of getting toward pre-COVID, was raising capital for real estate syndications, specifically a lot of apartment syndicators. So to explain that, it's basically where a lot of people come and pool their money together to purchase an apartment building or an apartment complex that maybe hasn't been run as efficiently as it can. And the idea is you buy it, you improve the operations to make it run efficiently, you decrease the costs, you make sure that the rents are at market level. A lot of these older buildings that have been just mom and pop managed have rent that's sometimes several $100s below what it should be based on the market. And so you kind of improve the property, improve the amenities, get that rent up to market rent, and then the value of that property is increased. So then, in 3, 5, 7 years, depending on the plan, you can then sell that for profit to somebody who wants to buy a property that's just ready to go. And so in that transition, that's really something I wanted to focus on. So I joined a mastermind group. I'm big on mastermind groups. Joined a mastermind group that kind of taught me how to go about, reaching that audience and getting those investors in with you. And so started going down that path, and along that path, my fiance and I, so to explain a little bit what she does, she's a fractional CFO. She helps small businesses to scale and improve their operations. And so that's kind of where the idea was born. Like, she had a client in particular that she had helped over the course of a couple of years go from barely making payroll to, at the end of last year, he had about $350,000 he had to figure out what to do with so he wasn't paying this huge tax bill. Right. And so that's where I'm like, you know what? This is a great niche. I mean, the guy's he's a plumber. He had a plumbing company. And I'm saying there's lots of these guys out here who own these businesses who've made them successful. And if we can join forces and help them to become even more successful and then figure out what to do with that money so they could plug it into investments that bring them money back, they can eventually get to a point where, even if they stepped away from their business, they still have money coming in the door to pay bills, and they've built a nice nest egg for themselves so they can actually retire someday.
I love that. My question is, did you have a connection prior to, like, was your family in the blue collar world, and that's why you're like, I want to help these people? Or was it because of you saw what your fiance was doing with these blue collar people that you're like, I want to help them out?
So it's both. I mean, my dad growing up was a mailman. My mom was a custodian for the schools. So, we are very solidly middle class, maybe even lower middle class. But, bills were paid. Didn't want for anything, but it's still paycheck to paycheck as the majority of America lives. And, my dad in particular, I saw him go through the 2008 crash and lose over half of his retirement savings. This amount of money that he had expected to have when he retired, over half of it was wiped out. And by that point, he didn't have enough time to rebuild it back to what he thought he would have. Now, thankfully, he has a pension and, he has Social Security, so he's still okay. But, kind of watching that and the types of work that I decided to get to get myself into career-wise meant that I wouldn't have a pension. And I don't bank on Social Security being available when I get to that point. So I really wanted to educate myself and learn how I could, get in a position where that wouldn't happen to me. And so these alternative investments is really what got me into, apartment syndications. And now for ourselves, we focus primarily on acquiring businesses. Same concept. We look to acquire businesses that, maybe have a lot of room for improvement. They've built a great foundation, great space, but maybe they just haven't been marketing well. Maybe they are overspending on some of their costs. Same concept as the apartment buildings, but we can come in, take it over, improve the operations, make everything a little more clean, reduce costs, do a better job of growing that business, and then same thing, train someone to operate it, and then we have a cash flowing business, and that'll bring money in the door for ourselves. And if we decide to sell it, the value will be much greater on the back end.
How did you learn this? Where did you learn this? Was it in a mastermind, or was it just a mentor came along and said, this is what you should be doing?
So it's a combination of a little bit of both. My fiance and I, we're big on masterminds. She learned a lot about this. She used to own a concrete company with her ex-husband. And she learned a lot of this by the fire. They're 1 year bringing in $500K in revenue and taking home $40,000. She had to figure out, they couldn't spend any more money on marketing because they were just barely scraping by as it was. She had to figure out how to take that same amount of revenue and make it more profitable for them. So she started doing a lot of learning, profit first systems, lots of different systems that you learn to do that. And she was able to accomplish that for her business and really help it grow, which is kind of where she got her passion for helping other businesses to do the same. And, as we're getting into it, I'm looking to join other masterminds as well to help the operational side of things while she focuses primarily on the financial side of things. So, lots of masterminds, lots of mentors, lots of learning by fire. We're in the process of trying to acquire a business now so we can implement all these practices. And we have a podcast where we kind of are detailing some of this journey, teaching people and teaching the things that we're learning as we go that'll be valuable.
something one of the best ways of learning is once you know it, teach it to someone else. And by doing that on your podcast, you're 10xing your knowledge base, because you're putting it into practice and you're sharing it. It's an amazing thing. And we'll learn more about your podcast near the end of the episode. I'm very
Yeah.
curious about it because I want to listen to the podcast. If you're teaching people, I need to learn this. And I need another podcast in my rotation. Always good to have more podcasts, more knowledge. But what do you do apart from the masterminds and learning from mentors? How do you invest in yourself? Because obviously, a lot of the entrepreneurs, they always say mentors and masterminds, and those obviously are the key to investing in yourself. But what else do you do to take you to the next level, to keep yourself on in your zone of discomfort, if you will?
I think always having big goals and bigger plans, right? And surrounding myself with the right people. Anytime I'm in a circle and I feel like maybe I've outgrown them, not in a negative way, but in the sense that, I want to be around people who are already where I want to be. So I'm constantly learning from them. And just making sure that I have those goals in place. We have visions of starting our own foundation and doing a lot of good for women who are in what we call like financially abusive relationships, where maybe sometimes they might be physically abusive, most of the time they're mentally abusive, but even more so they're just financially reliant on a partner in a relationship that they no longer want to be a part of. And we have some visions of helping that with helping with attorneys fees and things like that to get out of those situations where it's tough. I mean, the finances are a big piece of why a lot of people stay in relationships that they shouldn't be in any longer. So having those bigger goals and those bigger dreams allows us to really dial in and say, okay, if we want to get to point Z, let's go backwards and find out how we work our way there. Starting with big goal, smaller goal, smaller weekly activity, daily activity, to see the path on how we can get ourselves there.
I love that. I love how you're breaking down that big vision into manageable steps. Because if you look at the big vision, it's a huge step to jump to it, and not a lot of people. But making that smaller steps bring it closer to reality. Question. Hold on, I had a question that I just popped out of my head. Give me a second here.
Yep, no worries.
Okay, yeah, it's about the syndication and how that works, because it is a powerful tool for passive income. But like, how does it, can you break it down for our listeners so that they can have a better understanding of what syndicating for apartments or syndicating for real estate is?
Sure. So there's going to be basically two sides of it, right? You have the general partners, and they're the ones who, they find the deal, they find the building that they want to buy, they underwrite it, meaning they go through and look at it and make sure that it meets all their criteria for the types of buildings they like to buy. They're the ones who are going to execute the plan over time. They're going to be the ones who, figure out, okay, this is what we can do. This is the time frame that we need. This is the amount of capital we need to do that deal. They're the ones, in it every day. They're the active investors. They're the active with their time. They're active a lot of times with their own money, and they're the ones doing the work. The other side is the limited partners, and those are the passive investors. These are the people who just say, look, I don't want to do any of this. You presented this deal to me. I think it looks great. I just want to put some money in and get more money back out, right? You think about a savings account, you put it in right now, you're lucky even in a high yield savings account if you're getting 5%. A lot of these types of deals, they're more risky. And so with more risk comes more potential reward, right? So a lot of these guys will look for some sort of a preferred return. So what that means is, say you're contributing $100,000 as your investment into this project. The investors get paid first. The investors who are passively, they're not involved in the day-to-day, typically they get paid first. So, they get a preferred return of, let's just say 8%. So every year they are supposed to get 8% return on their money. And if they don't get it in 1 year, it's made up in later years, which is typically the case. But they get paid first. And then anything above that threshold, and there's usually some sort of a split between the passive investors and the active investors. And what that does is it means that everyone's on the same page, right? They have to perform well on that deal in order to make their money. So it makes everyone on the same page. And then the goal usually is an exit within 3 to 5 or sometimes 7 or 10 years, depending on the project. And then same thing, there's a split of some sort at the end, which is when the active investors make most of their money and the passive investors get a bigger payday. Now, some of the other benefits is a lot of times there is some taxable benefits. A lot of times there's depreciation on these large buildings, and that can be split amongst the investors. So if they're looking to invest in something and not pay a bunch of taxes on it in the interim, a lot of times that could be a huge benefit as well. So one of the big caveats is in many of these deals, you have to be what's called an accredited investor. Accredited investors are qualified by either earning as an individual $200,000 a year for the past 2 years, or having a net worth of $1 million. So going back to one of the reasons I like to focus on blue collar workers or blue collar business owners is because a lot of times they meet that threshold, but they have no idea that any of this exists. They have these businesses that may be worth $1 million, or they may qualify based on that $200,000 a year threshold and just have no idea that there's any sort of opportunity like this out there. So that's kind of the basics of it. It's kind of a big thing, but ideally, if you're a passive investor, what you're doing is saying, hey, I like this idea. I want to invest, what's your minimum? Usually it's 50,000, sometimes 100, sometimes more. And what's the return I'm going to get on my money for that? And then it's, as an investor, if you're looking to hop into something like this, you want to vet the operators. You want to know that they have a history of doing this, that they understand what they're doing, and be comfortable enough with them before you're giving up a big chunk of change to invest in one of their projects.
Yeah. Knowing who you're dealing with in business is very, very important. And touching on that, you have obviously through the masterminds and the mentors, and obviously doing these syndications, have built up an incredible network of people that you can reach out to and obviously learn from. How important is that network for, let's say, blue collar workers as well as entrepreneurs to help them build into maybe passive income, but also build themselves as a business owner?
Sure. And network is always important. I mean, you want to be with other business owners as a business owner. That's kind of how I got into this space, was just networking, attending conferences. That's the first place I really learned about apartment syndications. I caught at the end of the year, we get pretty slow in the mortgage space. I had somehow gotten connected with somebody who sent me, hey, we got this conference coming up, and he was constantly sending me stuff. And I finally had a slow weekend, and I said, you know what? I'm just going to go. I'm going to see what this is about. And that's where my eyes were opened to syndications. Prior to that, my knowledge on real estate investing was primarily, buying a house, renting it out to somebody. And that takes time to build up. Something like this allows you to build up on a much grander scale a lot more quickly. And so the networking is super important. And that's the reason, I want to be that kind of liaison for people. If they want to find these types of investments, you could do it yourself. Anybody can go out there and find these people and attend these conferences and go to these meetups and find these folks. But I've been doing it for 5 years now. And, I'd like to be that liaison. We'll say, well, I don't really know where to find this stuff, but you say, can I just talk to you and you let me know if a deal comes up? And then we can do it that way.
I love that. I love that. As we're coming too close to the end of the episode, I have 2 more questions for you. The first one is, you're a huge advocate for teaching the middle class how to use these financial tools that make the uber rich even richer, and how to create the wealth. How can entrepreneurs listening to this episode start applying those principles to their own business, even if they're starting from scratch?
Yeah, I mean, I think finding educational platforms, people who are going to teach you, as we mentioned, we have a podcast where we kind of do that, but finding and learning, there's always good books out there. I think one of the biggest books that almost every investor will tell you kind of change their mindset is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Everyone's heard of it. Until I read it, I didn't understand the hype behind it. Once you read it or listen to it, you'll understand why that's kind of, the investor's Bible. That's kind of where we all start off on this journey, because it really shifts your mindset from thinking about how we've been ingrained our entire lives to, you know, get good grades so you can go to college, so you can get good jobs, so you can get steady pay, so you can put money away for retirement. And that model can work, but in a lot of ways it's very dated. And so that kind of shifts your mindset and how you think, and that's the biggest piece. Once you've changed that thought process and that have that paradigm shift on how you think about money, there'll be no turning back. You won't be able to get enough of it.
I love it. I love it. All right. My last question is, I got your 10-year-old self next to me, Jerry. He is a fun guy. He wants to throw the football. I'm just not a football player. I'm a Canadian, so I play hockey. So we had a little difficulty there. But what's one piece of advice you would love to hand back to your 10-year-old self that will give you a heads up in the rest of life?
Yeah, if I can go back, the first thing I'd teach myself about house hacking as your first property. That was the one thing that I wish I knew coming up. But more so than that, basically what we just talked about, that, it's not always the college educated that are going to have the riches. It's more about creating something where you don't rely on anybody else for your income, for your well-being, where you are the one creating, you are the one relying on yourself each and every day to make the life that you want.
I love it. Great piece of advice, Jerry. I'm going to jump off stage, dissect that a bit more. I want you to let the audience know where they can listen to your podcast, how they can get in contact with you, maybe how they can join one of your syndications if you have anything coming up. The floor, sir, is yours.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you would like to get in contact, you can find me on my website, ironcastlecapital.com. You could find out more about syndications there. You could find out ways to contact me. If you want to listen to the podcast, it's called the Blue Collar Wealth Club Podcast, and you could find it on Spotify. You could find it on Apple Podcasts, and we're always looking to interview business owners if you want to reach out and be a guest.
Amazing. Jerry, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. I had a great time learning about your casino days and some of the big hands you played in and were a part of, to learning about apartment syndication, something I never even knew was a thing. I knew about passively investing in real estate, but I didn't know it was called that. And it's an amazing thing. I love learning about real estate because it's something that's I've never learned about. So I want to thank you so much for being here, and it was a pleasure chatting with you.
You as well, man. Appreciate you having me on.
To my audience, check out the show notes down below to connect with Jerry for all those websites, to get to his podcast, his website, his social media. It's all going to be down there. Make sure you connect with him if you are looking to start, passively investing, especially if you're a blue collar, because we have to help you take you out of the middle class and put you into that upper class. Jerry, again, thank you so much for being here. To my audience, thank you for listening. And as always, remember to invest in yourself.